the Scottish branch of the APM. You guys will be in listen-only mode. The session will last for about an hour. It'll be about 30 to 40 minutes of a presentation, and we'll have Q&A at the end. However, Martyn's keen to have questions as we go through. So if you could write any questions in the question panel during the webinar, and we'll pick them up at an opportune moment. Following the webinar, the recording will be uploaded on the APM YouTube account, and the slides will be put on the APM Share Slide account, both of which will be listed on the branch pages on the APM website, but this will be after 5 days. This session will count towards your CPD. So today we are joined by Martyn Link. Martyn is a scientist by training and began his career at Wood Mackenzie, where he focused on strategic intelligence. He subsequently helped shape the investment portfolio of a biotechnology innovation fund before joining Wood in 2011. Martyn's passion is to shape the energy transition to create a low-carbon, sustainable future for all. And as Chief Strategy Officer, he leads Wood's Energy Transition Megatrend and Corporate Strategy team. Martyn's had the privilege of being at the heart of many of the transformational changes that have shaped Wood over the last 10 years as they've pivoted towards the energy transition. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand you over to Martyn.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to the APM for this invitation. And it's a real privilege to be able to share this time with you. We've got about an hour, and I've probably got 3 different sections of my talk to share with you, and we'll go through that step by step. But just to repeat what Alan said, I am very open to questions during the talk. If there's a particular thing that I mention or you want to ask a question about, just send that through and we'll try and pick them up as we go. But if not, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So yeah, I just want to say hi to everyone. As Alan was saying, I've been with Wood for 11 years now, and the last 5 or 6 of those I've been running the strategy function within Wood, and the last 3 years I've also been leading the energy transition megatrend for Wood. So I want to talk firstly about that, about what does the energy transition and net zero mean to Wood. Then I'll talk a little bit about COP and some of the things that we got up to and some reflections on COP. And then finally, making it very relevant for all you project management gurus out there, I'm going to offer some reflections of what I think the net zero world might mean for experts in project management. So if I go to my first slide, basically I wanted to start back in 2019, take a bit of a step back to when I first got asked to lead the energy transition megatrend. Wood had realized, the leadership had realized that this was a big disruptor that could potentially be a risk or an opportunity for us. And so back in 2019, we did some assessment of it, and in April 2019, I was asked to lead it. And basically at that point, I had to figure out, okay, well, what is it? That was the first thing, really. And I'm sure we've all heard of the energy transition, but back then it was a bit more of an unknown term. And I kind of came up with this concept back in June 2019 to try and help people, all the different kinds of people within Wood, understand the energy transition. And I deliberately kept away from talking about clean and dirty or black or green. But I came up with this 4 category way of thinking about it. And I'm sharing this with you tonight because I think it's helpful for all of us, no matter what industry we work in or what company we work in, to have this kind of mindset. And the first is to stimulate wise investment. As we look at what's happening in the world and where we need to get to, right in the middle of it is finance and money, and how we form the right partnerships to achieve the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which are the world's biggest sustainability project. And how we do that will take companies like Wood. We're a very big, if you don't know us, we're a very big engineering company, 40,000 people globally, and other companies like us to really help direct the people with the money to the right projects. Around that, we see really we're in heavy asset industries. Don't know what industry you're in, but for us, we're in things like oil and gas, mining, transportation. These are big assets. And when you're doing projects, they can be very big and $1 billion sometimes. And so the key things there we need to think about is energy efficiency, climate resilience, and circular economy. And we've been thinking about this for the last 3 years as we've seen these things become more and more prominent in the public consciousness. But we also need to think about the sustainable asset investment. On my slides have just disappeared. So yeah, sustainable asset infrastructure is basically, with all these heavy industries, we need to think about what's in the ground already, what's on the ground, and how do we get the most out of it so that they're not, we're not replacing them, and it's even more unsustainable to keep replacing things that if we can get an extra 10 years out of an asset, that's better than replacing it with a brand new one if possible. So we need to make what we have already more sustainable. And that's about reducing the carbon emissions, ideally reducing the fuel usage, reducing leakage, and in an ideal world, increasing production while decreasing cost. I mean, that's the perfect holy grail, but we don't always manage to achieve all of those. We also think about sourcing technical solutions. So we're going to need new technical solutions. A lot of it is about scaling up and deploying. So for renewables, we already have the technology that we're going to need to achieve the 2035 targets. That's what the International Energy Agency have told us. But there will be new technology needed around hydrogen and CCUS, and we think we can play a part in that, as well as energy storage. And then the final piece of the jigsaw is the securing integrated energy. And really, this is about connecting supply and demand and helping to build resilience in our infrastructure so that we don't get things like the shock that we had recently with Storm Marwyn, because actually we've understood how to integrate variable renewable power generation with stable demand. And so what I would leave you with on this slide is, when I was producing this, I came up with this phrase: you cannot earn your way out of a problem you have lived your way into. We can't just change our business model and think we're just going to earn money in the same way that we did in the past. We actually have to change the way we live, and as individuals, as citizens, as employees. This is every aspect of our life, not just how we run our business. So that's, everyone has a role to play. And then I want to talk just a little bit about scenario planning, because doing this thinking about, okay, what does this mean for Wood today? We also thought about the next 15 years and projected forward to 2035. And we asked ourselves, what could the energy transition mean in the next 15 years? What could be the future of the energy industry in 2035? And so effectively, without going into a lot of methodology around scenario planning, we came up with these 4 scenarios and based around the speed of the energy transition and the depth of the energy transition. So would it be very fast, but quite shallow, or would it be fast and quite deep? And so we came up with these 4 scenarios. And these really helped us understand the uncertainty that's kind of coming over the next 15 years and try and really lock them into our thinking today, so that as these various uncertainties played out, when we looked at about over 200 different uncertainties in this process, we could kind of try and navigate our way through it. And if I show you the next slide, so if you take those 4 scenarios, they can basically be plotted on a 2x2. So we saw that when you do scenario planning, it's really about trying to hone in on the 2 biggest uncertainties, and then you plot them on a XY chart. And so here we figured out that actually one of the biggest factors is the degree of global solidarity in the world. Will the world pull together? Will it really become much more consensus driven and people really get behind this, or will it fragment? So will it be a high degree of solidarity or a low degree? And then on the other axis was technology. Will technology be deployed at scale, at pace, at an affordable cost? Or will it not? Will technology be a problem? And so if you do this kind of high solidarity, high degree of technology, you get the tailwind scenario where really this was the only one in the 3 where we actually achieved the Paris Agreement. When you looked at the other 3, so let's say a world where there's a low degree of solidarity and a low degree of technology deployment, you get doldrums and you actually don't achieve the Paris Accord. turbulence and headwind are a mixture of these, and you also don't achieve them. So the reason I put these pictures up here is because in offshore Europe, the last time we had offshore Europe and we met face to face in Aberdeen in September 2019, feels a long time ago now, but this is, I shared 4 stories of personas that I'd basically written a story about each of these people, Raphael and Sophie and Tasmin, and I made up these stories about what it would be like to grow up in this world, in the turbulent world, and be 18. By the time you reach 2035, you're entering the workforce as an 18-year-old. And so I kind of told this story. And so I used storytelling to basically try and hit people in their emotional heart, because a lot of the times people make decisions based on their children. And so I use children to really illustrate the world that we're leaving as an inheritance to those coming up behind us. And my point really was only with Sophie, who's the top left-hand corner in the tailwind scenario, do we actually achieve the targets that we want to achieve. So that's kind of thinking back to 2019. And then the last 3 years, as I say, Wood's been really investing in this area and trying to understand it. And obviously the world has really changed. We've seen a massive shift over the last 3 years. And this was all leading up to COP in Glasgow last November. And I was fortunate to be in Glasgow for 2 weeks during COP. And we retrofitted our office. We've got a nice size of office in Glasgow. And we stripped out an entire floor. I don't know if anyone on the call was able to attend, but we had a lot of people, as it says there, about 3,000 in-person visitors to our venue during the course of the 2 weeks. We had 106 events and 250 speakers with 200 industry partners. And so we were part of what I was calling like the fringe COP, because you didn't need a blue or green pass to get in, but you did need to be in, to apply to register. And there was some incredible speakers. And what we really tried to do is make it a hub for business. So I think one of the most encouraging things from COP is, and many people have said this, is business showed up. A lot of businesses were in the blue and in the green zone, and we did our bit on the fringe as a fringe event alongside a few other companies. And I think one of the good things was that being a Scottish headquartered company, this was really in our backyard. So we went big. And it paid off in the end, even with all the uncertainties of COVID. So we invented something called Woodhouse, and we had grass on the wall and things like this. It was quite innovative and funky. And there's lots of pictures on LinkedIn if you want to see what happened there. But in terms of the headlines, I mean, I'm sure all of us have been, reading the FT and Economist, and we kind of have our own views on what the highlights were of COP. But I've just picked up a few here that I think, I would say it was a mixed scorecard. There was some things that were very encouraging. So, there was meaningful progress across mitigation, adaptation, and finance, particularly the GFANs, the Glasgow Finance with Mark Carney, that he, kind of got a network of networks and kind of has got the whole financial community trying to point in the sustainable direction. So I think there was positives there. We saw some real steps forward around methane in particular, and a phasing out of coal. But there's also some kind of more difficult conversations, and countries looking for that $100 billion for the developing nations. And so that issue of trust, commitments that have been made and then struggling to back them up. We saw some nations not turn up, and so some of these things, could have had a real challenge in terms of making the deals happen on the day. But I think, there's a commitment to come out of COP with them even more, for 27, which is in Egypt this year, more ambitious plans than was brought to COP26 in Glasgow. So I think overall, there's a lot of successes, but also some could do better. And this kind of goes into it in a little bit more detail. And for me, I think, particularly the fossil fuel conversation around coal being phased out, but not totally down, was interesting. And also fossil fuel subsidies being, inefficient use of subsidies. We had that phrase. So there's steps along the way to a post-fossil fuel world, but particularly countries like China and India, that, they're using it to fuel their economy. as well as their transportation and heating and electricity. There's a real challenge around how they develop as a nation, whilst also committing to some of these targets. However, I would also say some of the big successes were things like the Race to Resilience and the Race to Zero. 8,000 non-state actors being part of Race to Zero, and Race to Resilience, which is like the sister. Basically Race to Zero is like the mitigation. How do we get greenhouse gases down by 45% by 2030? And Race to Resilience really is about climate adaptation. How do we help countries adapt to the changes of climate over the next 10, 20 years? So they're like these sister organizations that are trying to drive global change. And Wood is actually part of the business interface of Race to Resilience, which was really good to see and got great traction. So I think, I've got this slide, which I think is one of the most encouraging aspects of COP, and probably my big takeaway is, for global greenhouse emissions, 88% of the world is now covered or is in the process of being covered. If you look the journey from January 2020 to a year later to January 2021, and then October the 31st to November, you see this, massive increase in countries committing to and pledging and legislating or considering legislating to bring in their emissions to net zero. So for me, this is an unstoppable momentum. I think it will happen. Whether we achieve it by 2050 and can we keep 1.5 alive is to be seen. I think it's going to be extremely challenging. But I think from a kind of a direction of the world has shifted. And so if we go back to the scenarios, in my mind, we're in kind of a tailwind / turbulent world. The turbulent world is one where the technology is there, but the solidarity kind of comes and goes. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So we saw the US pull out of the Paris Accord, then come back in. We've seen China commit to net zero. We've seen India commit to net zero, but by 2060 and 2070. So you've got this kind of picture of, will we make it, will we not make it? There's a bit of turbulence there, but there's definitely a lot of tailwinds to help us push us in that direction. So that's the bit that's kind of thinking about Wood and thinking about COP. Now I want to turn to project management, and this is kind of just my own thoughts, and I want to share these with you. So please be gentle. I'm testing these with you live tonight, and I haven't shared them before in this format. So this is kind of just, I thought, what would these guys like to hear about? So I think when I look at the net zero world and where the whole kind of industry, all these various industries and finance and countries are going, and society, and then I think about project management and project work, I think there's three big dimensions that are all changing at once, effectively. And the first one is stakeholder alignment, where you're looking at all the different stakeholders. If you're from the oil and gas industry, like Wood, that's our kind of heritage over the last few years. You talk about social license to operate, and the license to operate has drastically changed over the last few years, and is being rewritten as we speak by society in terms of what they expect and what they want. So there's more stakeholders are involved. They've got more power through Twitter and social media and all these kind of ways of mobilizing people. It's more complicated. So stakeholder alignment is really shifting. Asset integration is another one, which is really shifting. When we think about the way that we're going to transform urban environments to try and electrify transportation, for example, where we're going to put all these charging grids, how we're going to scale that up. How we're going to incorporate hydrogen into potentially residential areas. There's a lot of integration of assets in the future where perhaps in the past we were able to do a greenfield site where there was nothing and almost act in isolation from what was around it. And then develop a fluidity. In the past, maybe we had a big operator or a big country and they commissioned a piece of work or a massive project. I think in the future there's going to be a lot more around, nimble and kind of agile developers who are looking to move a portfolio of projects forward. And so when I think about it, and think about these three axes, I kind of think about stakeholder alignment. The key question here is, what is the benefit? So, when we think about resilience, let's say you're downtown New York and you want to incorporate some form of renewables into your, block. How do you get all the stakeholders involved to sign up to that and think, actually, this is a worthwhile investment, and actually we're going to benefit as well as the government's achieving its net zero target. So the core benefits of society who need to benefit from these net zero policies is going to be much more important in the future, and it will need to be demonstrated. And as well as that, you also have the job creation. People want to see a just and fair transition. So they want to see jobs created in the industries that are going to dwindle inevitably. But how do we transfer those jobs to the new emerging areas, and how do we make that a just and fair transition? And again, society wants to have a voice in that. I was part of a panel in Aberdeenshire where I was speaking to 22 members of the public, organised by the European Justice Commission, on a citizen jury for Aberdeenshire. And that was their question, how do we ensure that we take everyone with us? And will it be possible to take everybody with us? That's a big question. But everybody's eyes are on these projects, and there'll be a lot more scrutiny, I think. In asset integration, the key question is, well, how will it work? We want to develop a modular plug-and-play solution rather than a bespoke gold-plating solution. So the more we can plug and play, the better. But the complexity here is you might have a modular plug-and-play solution, but the environment that you're bringing it into could be very different, particularly in an urban brownfield environment. And then the last one here is about how do we work together, the kind of traditional contracting of, doing a bid, doing the kind of pre-feed, feed, in the kind of the oil and gas world, and then doing kind of the construction, all that kind of, those years that it takes, and thousands of man hours of engineering hours. In the world in the future, it's going to be a lot less engineering probably, because these things are not as technically demanding. They're more plug and play. But they're also going to need to move quickly because we're up against targets, we're up against timelines, and also the way that money moves along along the supply chain. A lot more developers are going to be involved, and they're going to be quite nimble. So how do you get that kind of agile contracting style? So
we've got a question, Martyn.
Yep,
how can we maximise economic benefit to the UK for this transition in terms of jobs, transferable skills from sectors, and even the supply chain itself?
Yeah, that's great question to think about. I think the economic benefit for the UK, I mean, this is a big topic and people have different opinions on it. Personally, I feel like we need to try and anchor more of the supply chain in the UK. When we think about emerging industries that have happened in recent past, like, for example, offshore wind, where the UK has got some great, resources. And then when we did the contracting, we managed to secure some of the supply chain, but a lot of the manufacturing was done overseas in China and Germany and elsewhere. And so we've insourced that expertise and that manufacturing, and hence we've lost some of that value as a country. So I think, as we think about things like carbon capture and hydrogen, and even offshore wind connected to hydrogen to produce green hydrogen, I think for me the question for the UK is going to be, what industries do we want to invest in? Because you're probably going to need to pick some as a government, as a country, and say, we think we can be competitive in manufacturing, X or Y. It might not be electrolyzers. It may be that China, steals a march on electrolyzers like it did with solar panels. But is there a kind of high-end technology that we can specialize in, or is it, how do we look at these clusters, these industrial clusters, and try and add value in there? Is that an opportunity for the UK? So I do think that it'll be more about securing the supply chain in the country, and becoming globally competitive in as many high-tech areas as we can. Those are probably the two things that I would offer, Alan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that answers the question. Thanks, Martyn.
Good. So I've just listed up a couple of bullet points. I'll not go through all those. You can kind of see where I'm going with those. But yeah, I think, you know, I've got one more slide on this. So I would keep that in your mind about the projects of the future. And if you want to read more about this, I don't know if you follow the Harvard Business Review, but they actually had a great article from the November-December edition, and it's called "Making Mega Projects More Modular." And if you want to, I think you can get 3 articles free online with the HBR. So making mega projects more modular. There's some really interesting examples. He talks about the subway in Spain. I think it's Madrid. He talks about versus compared to the Channel Tunnel. I think this could be really interesting for you project management gurus to get your teeth into, to think about some of these ways that things might change in the future. So my other slide on this is this one here. So I think those are the 3 kind of dimensions I think projects are shifting in. This, for me, I've just outlined the 5 shifts that I see in project management, and you know, feel free to disagree or add another 3 or 4. I'm not saying this is exhaustive, but from where I've kind of been researching and standing, I think I can definitely see some shifts that are coming in your space. So the first one is moving from design complexity to integration complexity. And I've mentioned some of this already, and it ties with the second one, which is from technical expertise to project bankability. I think, you know, I'm not an engineer, I'm a scientist, but having joined a big engineering company, there's a lot of kudos in kind of the technical complexity of a lot of these projects that have been done over the last 20, 30 years. And the designs are very complex. They take a long time to produce, many thousands of people hours. And then they're kind of built and constructed in this incredible cities in the sea, that you could call them. And I think in the future, we're going to see less of that, and we're going to see more integration. So how do we build something? You know, if you take, for example, the forecourt challenges that BP or Shell have, you know, let's say they've got, 20,000 forecourts around the world, and they need to all of a sudden move from just being diesel and petrol, potentially, to being diesel, petrol, and electric, or maybe just electric. And so, you know, you've got, let's say you've got, I don't know, 5,000 forecourts around Europe, and you need to do a modular approach at pace to deliver something different for BP. That's a huge integration complexity. Even if you've got all the supply chain sorted, even if you've got the technical equipment and solutions in your back pocket, integrating them into the cabling, the infrastructure, the surrounding environment, both physically and digitally, is going to be a huge challenge to do at pace. The technical expertise to project bankability, this is really about the projects that are going to win in the future, the projects that are bankable with finance behind it, and where you've de-risked the project. I know this has always been true for projects, but I think it's going to become even more critical. And it's going to be, for me, it'd be almost like the rate limiting step, rather than the technical expertise of that follows FID. So if you can get a project that's bankable, because the technical complexity is less, it becomes actually the crunch point moves up earlier in the process. So I think that's a key area. The other aspect, I mean, I've looked at infrastructure contracting over the last few years. I've got familiar with that around a big piece of infrastructure, and also oil and gas. You know, I've been looking at that through my work. Typically what happens is, I don't know what background everyone on the call is, but in infrastructure you have like more of a consortium approach. So you might have 4 or 5 big competitors working together on one big project like Heathrow expansion. Whereas in oil and gas, it's much more about one tier 1 provider, and then they manage the tier 2s and tier 3 contractors. And I think in the future, we're probably going to see more of a consortium approach, just because of the fact that the government is probably going to be one of the consortium entities, and they're going to probably want a grit to de-risk it by having more people involved. And I think we'll see more infrastructure type contracting in energy, and in kind of let's call it decarbonized hydrocarbon space, because there'll be more stakeholders involved, and they'll be trying to de-risk it and move at pace. I think this kind of ties in with the government as a regulator, moving to the government as a customer. And I know the government is a customer in many industries already, but I think it will become more and more as we see. When you think about residential heating, for example, there's a huge challenge. Really, in my mind, it's like transportation, residential heating, and industrial decarbonisation are the three biggest challenges. And so somebody at some point in the government is going to need to say, this is the type of residential heating we want in the future. And so that's going to produce massive opportunities for new projects, probably smaller, probably more modular, probably not as high margin, but actually the government will be the customer, I think, because we're going to see more public spending in this area, I believe. And then the last one there, I put the engineer is king to the project manager is queen. Basically, what I'm saying here is that the kind of the top dog in some of these big mega projects of the past has been the process engineer or some sort of technical engineer who knows this, the fluid flow, the piping complexity, who can model all the different things. And I think in the future, it's going to be the project manager who can do this on a repeatable, at cost, at scale, with innovative solutions. For example, the article talks about, I think it's the mayor of Madrid, rather than hiring one or two drillers to drill kind of the subways, they hired 6, and they basically got them competing against each other and set up this kind of internal competition for the project. And that just shows the ingenuity of that. And he smashed his schedule. And I deliberately put Queen there because I think there is a need for greater diversity, particularly gender diversity. And I think we will see people being thrust into opportunities to kind of earn their spurs more quickly. And perhaps it's an opportunity for younger people and people from different backgrounds. And I think people who can really nail project management and they've got a little bit of a unique or different experience, nationality, ethnicity, whatever. I think there's a real opportunity in the future for those to become superstars, basically, and a bit like the rock stars of project management. That's just my opinion, but I think there's a real open door for that. So I think this is basically my last slide. So be ready with your questions or disagreements or comments. And this is basically my summary slide. When I look at all the challenges that we have, I mean, I've chatted to you as project managers. This is me chatting to you as citizens of the country, wherever you are. And so I'd really encourage each of us to kind of have a think about these 6 mindset shifts, where we need to move from a polarized debate on fossil fuels to actually appreciating that we urgently need to quickly transition industry, jobs and communities to a different future, but we need to avoid polarizing this debate into us and them. And we need to realize all of us are employees if we have a job. Some of us are employers. We're all citizens, we're all voters. We all have a stake in this future. So it needs to be we rather than us and them. And then I think another shift is that we need to think not just about the needs of my people, whoever they are, it could be people in your country, to also the needs of the foreigner. And when you look at some of the data on who's going to be impacted by climate change the most, it's going to be people in the East and Asia and Africa. And people are talking about potentially 100 million climate refugees over the next 50 years, which is a phenomenal number. When we think like Syria was something like 3 million, or I can't remember exactly, it was in the small millions, and we could have 100 million climate refugees if we're not careful. We need to move from a simplistic approach to emerging industries to, as I said earlier, investing in areas where the UK can be globally competitive. So, the UK has a responsibility to look globally and think, okay, we think we can be globally competitive in this, and put our chips on relatively few areas. Been focused from a desire to create wealth for myself, for the desire to create wealth for my children's children. Short-termism is going to kill all of this. And so we need to be thinking not just about our own future, our own job security, but also our children's children, and also the shareholders of the future, not just our current shareholders, but actually our shareholders' children. So we're thinking long-term, and we're thinking about leaving the planet a better place for all of us, which is a cliche, I know, but it's actually, how do you do that when you're within a company? So you're actually generating something back for society. And then the last one, from living as I want, as long as I don't hurt anyone, which is kind of a bit of like materialistic UK philosophy, to living with the knowledge that every choice has unintended consequences. Everything we do has an unintended consequence, and we need to be cognizant of this as we think about the choices that we make, because there is going to be trade-offs. You know, I'll end on this controversial note and then open up for questions. I'm not sure everyone can benefit from this transition. I think there will be winners and losers. I'm not sure there is enough money to pay for everything we need to pay for in the time available that will give everyone employment and make everybody's life better. And I think at the moment we're hoping that there's some sort of nirvana where we'll produce sustainable, inclusive growth and produce resilient societies and new jobs and new industries. But looking from the history of the world, it'd be amazing if we managed to do that and everybody benefited. So in the world in the future, I suspect some countries and companies will push ahead and some will be left behind. And I think we need to be really conscious that we're part of the ones who push forward and actually have this mindset that is thinking beyond our own short-term selfish interests. So with that, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity, and hopefully something of what I've said has stimulated some interest, and we can open it up to any questions. Back to you, Alan.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That was a really good presentation. We've got a few questions here. The first one was relating to your scenarios, the 4 scenarios you had. It says, how has the scenario planning considered future energy scenarios and utilised adaptive pathways?
So yeah, one of the good things about the process that we went through was we kind of borrowed the methodology that Shell, who are seen as the pioneers of scenario planning, I think it's called inductive logic, and so we utilised a number of kind of industry best practice scenarios. So like the IEA and BP and Shell and Equinor and others, who have basically been doing this for a long time. And so we looked at what they were saying, and we didn't want to copy it, but we actually tested our thinking against it. So, you know, are we just being crazy and coming up with some really weird ideas, or actually is this, because the thing that you want to do with scenarios is you want to make it plausible and logic, but also you want to stretch, you want to stretch it as far as you can before it becomes science fiction. And that's what we tried to do. And we looked a little bit at adaptive pathways, but I wouldn't say it was a massive feature. Most of it was, I guess, the scenarios were kind of a linear progression. So if this happens, then this, then this, then this. And now we're kind of 3 years later, we're looking at it and thinking, okay, if we take like the turbulent world and zoom in on that world, which is the one I think we're in, what's the next big questions that we want to ask ourselves this year? So that's kind of where we are just now.
Okay, thanks for that. The next one is this person was asking, they're wondering if bite-sized projects and delivering each one is far better than delivering one main project, especially if the technology and deliverables are changing as quickly as they're doing now.
Yeah, that's a great question. The article actually that I mentioned, I would reference that where they talked about the Tesla kind of gigafactory for their batteries that they're trying to produce at scale. And they took a modular approach to that, and each unit was kind of self-contained. I think they had about 24, 25 different kind of battery units to produce, and they kind of launched once they'd only got about 5 or 6 in place, and then they announced it open, and they opened the facility. So yeah, I think bite-size approach, when you can do it, is the way to go. I think the interesting thing is, and I didn't touch on this, is the energy transition and net zero. A lot of the conversation is around molecules versus electrons. You know, in the past, our energy has come from mainly molecules, hydrocarbon molecules. In the future, it's going to come from electrons. And just by their very nature, electrons lean or lend themselves to a more modular approach, because with a hydrocarbon, it's extremely flammable, obviously, when you need to be able to connect the inflow and the outflow in a safe way. Whereas, an electron, a battery can just stand there and it's very self-contained. So actually, I think these solutions will be much more bite-sized, and because of that, that's why the cost can come down much more quickly.
Okay, the next one is, do you think the short-term investment strategies that the money houses are taking are aligned with high-risk, low-margin, capital-intensive energy transition projects?
Say that one again now. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. Do you think the short-term investment strategies that the money houses are taking are aligned with high-risk, low-margin, capital-intensive energy transition projects?
I mean, I think that I would have to probably say no. I mean, I think when I look at the money markets and where they're putting their money, I think that there's probably, when you say those three criteria, it wouldn't be a very attractive proposition if it was low margin, high risk. And I think most of the money is looking for somewhere that's bankable, where the risk is manageable. I think people are prepared to take lower margins, but it needs to be enduring. So if you think of it like a road toll, one of the companies I look at as a competitor of Wood used to own part of a road toll, and it's not very, some might say it's not very exciting to build and own a road toll. I'm sure there's people on the call who love that kind of thing, but in terms of return, you don't have any fluid flowing through it. There's no kind of production capacity. It's just a road. However, from a financial perspective, it can be very, very lucrative over 20, 30 years. And then when they came to sell it, they made a massive amount of money. And so I think when you look at the money houses and where they want to put their money, in the past, they were maybe thinking, okay, as the volatility of the commodities, like mining and oil and gas, if you pick the right spot in the commodity cycle, you can make a lot of money. You can lose them a lot of money as well. So they were kind of chasing growth, I would say. Whereas now, I suspect what will happen is people will chase stability and sustainability. So if you can show that you're going to produce 3% margins, which will eventually lead to 5% margins for 20 years, that I think is where the money will end up moving towards, versus, well, we could make 15 to 20% this year, and next year it'll be -5. I think intuitively that kind of stability is more attractive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next one is, do you think businesses are genuinely willing to shift attitudes towards collaborative business models, or do you think they are stuck in traditional client-contractor variation order models?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because I would say, on the positive side, like the degree of collaboration that I see since 2019, well, probably since the oil price crash in 2014-15, and then the last 3 years, I think it's been incredible, actually. There's a lot of collaboration now, because people are realizing that these challenges are much bigger than one company. No single company can fix these problems. It's going to take 5,000 companies working together. So at that level, I think there is more willingness to work together and partner together. I think on the not so good side, I think it is more, when you talk about contracting style and mindsets, there's still a lot of fixed mindsets, I think, around how to contract with the supply chain and how to make money and where the value is. So that, in the midst of trying to figure out how to fix the world's biggest problems, companies like Wood and others in the supply chain are still being hammered for every single penny of margin. So I think that the challenge is, how do you put a price on ESG? So, you'll be familiar with ESG, environmental social governance. And so some companies are way ahead of others in terms of their ESG credentials, but there's no real premium, potentially apart from the stock market, there's no real premium in contracting for ESG leaders. So that actually acts as a disincentive to invest in that and to be a real champion, because actually when it comes to it, you're probably just competing on cost with everybody else. So I'd say it's mixed.
Okay. Another question here. How can we make the energy transition relatable to the wider audience, i.e., how does members of the public know how they can get involved and what they have to do to play their part?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good work gone into this in and around COP, actually, where people tried to explain what it meant for them. Part of it, I think, is focusing on, if you're talking about it as a company, which parts of your company are directly relatable to consumers and to customers or the society, and what parts of it, are a bit more challenging. So, for us, we try and talk about things that people will kind of understand more readily, that are very tangible, and we try to make it real by interviewing people and helping them tell their story. But I think if I go back to my very first slide, talking, I guess that's not for public, that's like business, like jargon for other business people. But when I was presenting to the 22 members of the public, I was basically asking myself this question: how do I help them to understand what needs to be done? And that's where I came up with these global mindset shifts. And I think whilst none of us can say what each other should be doing, we can't tell each other we've all got to get electric vehicles and we've all got to get ground source heat pumps and all these things. If we ask ourselves, okay, well, we cannot earn our way out of a problem we've lived our way into, that poses the question: how can we live differently? And for each of us, that might be a small shift, but it does encompass everything that we do in our lives. And so I think it's about, if you're trying to communicate with somebody, you need to think about, okay, am I communicating as an individual or as a company? And then think, okay, how does my business connect with that person who I'm trying to target? And then tell a story about that, and try and tell a story and weave it into their life. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my kids and presentations that I give. So hopefully a few of those things came across today, but there is no one silver bullet, unfortunately. You have to do the hard work of thinking about it in every single industry.
Okay. 2 years into the pandemic, do you see project management still evolving and changing as rapidly as it is, i.e. through data analytics, online, through Teams, or do you see it going back into the more standard approach of in-person and the human touch?
Well, if you get if you've got 3 articles to use for your HBR free articles, there's basically 3 articles on project management in that same edition. So the one before that one I mentioned is called Agility Hacks, and then the one before that is called something like Projects Are the Future or something. The project economy has arrived. So if you pick those 3, that's your freebies all done. But basically it talks about exactly that thing. And I would share my perspective as well, which is, I think, when you look at COVID and what's happened, we've basically undergone about 3 or 4 shocks at the same time. We've had an economic shock because things have been shut. We've had a health shock because we've had a pandemic. We've had a technology shock because we're all working from home and on Zoom and all the time. And then there's probably a few other shocks in there that we've had for good measure. But I think when you look at the question we need to ask ourselves is, what's going to stick after we kind of go back to normal, whatever normal is. And I think when you look at the strengths of project management and how easily translatable it is to a digital environment, I think it could be a real boost actually to the way that people operate. For example, for wood, a lot of our project management will be done by people on site, where they would visit, they would ask people questions, they would fill in charts, Excel forms, go back, write a report. They were maybe traveling to that site maybe twice a year, and so, or every quarter. So it's very laborious, it takes a long time. And then people say, oh, we've got this great technology solution. And it never worked, did it? It took about 5 years to get one tool being used routinely. And then all of a sudden in 3 weeks, we all went to virtual and we're doing digital teams every day. And I think that is a massive portal for project management to then move everything to digital. And if you combine that with the GPS, the advances in GPS and GIS, kind of understanding locations and geospatial information, if you put all that together and then combine it with data visualization, that to me is a very powerful combination for project management, basically to do everything remotely. So I think a lot of that will stick. I think what won't stick is you need to look people in the whites of the eyes and actually assess. If they're building something physical, you need to assess it in person and not just take people's word for it. So I think there will be that kind of a whole health and safety and QA, QC, which will remain as a critical part of site visits. But a lot of the transactional day-by-day, checking on progress, recording quarterly reports will just go digital, and that'll be done from people's homes or offices, wherever they are. So yeah, I'm not an expert, but that's kind of how I would sum it up.
Okay, we've got 3 questions left.
Okay.
I think you've answered this early on, but would you say that COP26 was a success? And what did it mean for Scotland and the Scottish business?
I think it was a success, Alan. I think there was high hopes, leading up to it, and then when it got closer and it was clear China wasn't going to turn up, and then there was a lot of fear. But I think looking back, it was definitely solidified the Paris Accord, and also it got people on the hook for things like the financial industry. Got really is on the hook. And then in the UK government saying every company needed a climate transition plan. So these are small things, but they're really significant. And it's almost to me like, like a ratchet when you can turn it in one direction, but it won't go back. It's almost like we've ratcheted up another few notches. We didn't get it to where we wanted it to get to, but we got it, maybe 2/3 of the way there. And as long as we don't go back, I would see it as a success. I think for Scotland and the UK, it showed. I think we did show climate leadership. I think we showed up, and we showed the best of Scotland in Glasgow. And I mean, I don't know if people were there, but for me, the buzz of being in Glasgow those 2 weeks, even though I wasn't in the blue zone or green zone, and I was at fringe events around the city, you felt like history was happening on your doorstep in Scotland, which is a phenomenal legacy, I think, for the country.
Okay. So how achievable do you think the climate goals were? Like, i.e., is 1.5 degrees, is it still alive?
I think it's on life support, Alan. I think there was a mantra, keeping 1.5 alive. And just for those who maybe don't know, I mean, this is all about temperature degree increase. We're at 1.2. The global average, if you compare it to the pre-industrial age, is 1.2 degrees higher. But obviously, this isn't felt evenly across the world. In some parts of the world, it's already at 3 degrees or 4 degrees higher. This is the global average. So I think when you look at the emissions reduction in 2020 due to COVID and 2021, and they've gone back up, and I think we're going to struggle to achieve the targets that we've set ourselves by 2050. So I personally, I fear that we're not going to achieve 1.5, and actually we'll overshoot it. But I think that, I was reading a book, Ministry of the Future, about the next 40 years, what might happen. And if you look at the data and the research, you can unwind some of the implications of carbon dioxide emissions being in the atmosphere if you act quick enough. But unfortunately, there'll be like a 100-year lag of that kicking in. So I don't. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think this is it's a point of no return is where we've got to, and we are undergoing unstoppable momentum in the right direction. However, will we break the 10-second, 100-meter, barrier? Maybe not. But even if it's like 10.5 seconds, I think that's still a phenomenal achievement.
Okay, and the last question, how can project management experts become more involved in the energy transition?
Yeah, I think, sessions like this are perfect for getting more involved. I have conversations with people who are, let's say, operational leaders in oil and gas companies, and they want to figure out what is the energy transition, how do I get more involved in it. I would encourage people to do a couple of things. One is look at jobs within your own company where you can become more exposed to some of these new industries. Can you move, kind of horizontally across your company? I think that's the first thing to think about. The second thing would be, even if you can't do that and you're kind of stuck in your lane, and it's not, let's say it's not very kind of new energy decarbonisation focused place, I think all of us can ask, how can we make our own projects more sustainable and make small changes that then build incremental change and become a bit of a sustainability leader in whatever project you're doing, and just ask really good questions of the key sponsors and stakeholders, and that will slowly open up their thinking, and you'll start to get noticed, and some of these ideas will filter through. For the more academic, there's starting to become new postgraduate courses. So 2 years ago, there was an MBA in Energy Transition and Sustainability launched at RGU, University in Aberdeen, that I got to be the external validator for. And so if you want to do like a big jump, you could think about doing maybe a specialized MBA or master's in sustainability. I've been coaching some students at Dundee who are doing just that. So there's various routes. I think speaking to your peers and colleagues who are in these industries as well, and seeing how they're kind of finding it, and what opportunities there are for you. I think the biggest thing actually is it's a very transferable skill, project management. It's not industry specific. The lessons that you learn and the skills that you learn are very transferable. And there's loads of conversations that I hear about agile and scrum teams and all these things, and it's a real buzz around it, and it's absolutely transferable to different industries. So I would be really encouraged that you're very highly employable in the net zero world.
Okay, there's one last question that I think we'll just manage to get in here, is that you mentioned Wood is considering more incipient technologies like hydrogen, but what is still required for hydrogen to become a more attractive business proposition in Scotland?
Yeah, good. I think there's still a cost challenge around hydrogen. It's not economical from a cost perspective, so that'll be things like scaling it up and getting bigger developments. Scotland's doing some good work, and there's a number of developments that are starting. So I think, yeah, I would just say, I think it's definitely making progress, and companies like SGN, the Scottish Gas Network, we're working closely with them, and they're really trying to build a hydrogen backbone across the east of Scotland. So I would say, how can we speed it up? More capital and even quicker decision making by operators and government, to really stimulate these industries as fast as possible.
Okay, well that's all the questions, and I've got a minute to thank you for giving up your time, which was a very topical and interesting presentation, so thank you very much. And also
Thanks,
I'd like to thank everyone else that took their time out their evening to attend. So thank you very much, and we'll catch you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.